share screen. This one. All right, can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I can see it.
All right. Is it too small? Should I make it bigger?
I'm okay, but feel free to weigh in, other peeps.
It's fine to me.
Give me a second so I figure out how to use Zoom. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more, just so it makes me feel better. Okay, so we're going over the anti-gloss today. And so basically what this is a rewriting of the gloss from the perspective of the opponent. So anytime, so say like, you know, the text is like, when somebody hews you from above, do XYZ. This one would be hew the other person from above. So the purpose of this is to, there's a couple of reasons that I wanted to do this. First, to understand the fencing that the glossator is expected to see. So I like to avoid using the term common fencing because I think it's often misused and I don't want to give like a wrong impression. But this will studying what the opponent's doing in these texts will certainly give you an idea of the type of fencing that whoever is writing it is expecting to go up against. And that's for better or for worse. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad fencing. It just means, it could mean that, like, you know, it could be, you know, part of the prerequisite fencing that they say when, at the beginning, when it says for someone who already knows how to fence. So it's not necessarily bad. It might be bad, but it's not necessarily bad. And I also like to think that the system is not supposed to just be for people who are bad at fencing. I think it should be, you know, kind of useful for all kinds of situations. And the second reason is to put yourself in the shoes of the opponent. So when we look at these sources, we look at, like, they have, you know, you have a little bit of theory and a lot of techniques. And basically what the techniques are solutions to problems. So if you just, you know, if you just open a book with no experience or anything and you just start, you know, miming the techniques, you're figuring out solutions to problems that you don't know. You're like the big computer from, you know, what is it? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that they asked it for the answer to the universe's biggest question and said 42, but then they didn't know what the question was, so it was useless. Well, that's what the techniques are like. So we need to understand what the opponent's doing, put ourselves in their shoes, understand why they're doing what they're doing, and only then can we really understand why the techniques are useful or how, you know, how we should use them. And also, like, put it into the context of the general strategy of the system, which is given to us in the precious little bit of theory that we're given throughout the gloss. So, sorry. Just give me 1 second. I have to figure out Zoom for a second. All right. Okay, so let's just get into it. We're going to go through the whole anti-gloss. It's not very long. So right, so this is reordered. So when I first did this, I just did it in the order of the glosses. I just went through each technique and basically wrote the opposite of it, or, wrote it from the other person's perspective. But then I went through again and I reordered everything to, put matching sections with each other, or things that I thought matched up, things with common themes. So that's what we're looking at right now. So this, to start off, and then I wrote a little settle for it, because why not? So to start off, we have the common lessons, and basically what they are just the opposite of the common lessons from the glosses. So first, when you hew with the sword, how you move your feet doesn't matter. Hew doesn't have to be long, it can be shortened. So that's the opposite of hew with a passing step. So shortening in the standard gloss it's framed in the seal house section as something that that is generally not good, that you can exploit, but it's not necessarily a bad thing to shorten yourself, because there's, the windings are shortened and we're supposed to do that. So there's situations in which you want to shorten. So not necessarily bad advice. When you fence someone, you may wait for your opponent to attack and block their attack with a parry. So that's the opposite of don't wait, always try to attack. And, it's a valid fencing strategy, I guess. All attacks don't need to be done with the full strength of the body. Take whatever hit you can get. If your opponent hews and does not come near with you with the edge of the body or the point to the face of the chest, you may freely disengage below and stab to the other side. If they do come near you, you have to parry. So this is, I guess, the first technique, and it's also the first technique in the glosses. So the gloss says hew near or else they'll disengage. So that means as the opponent, you have to be ready to disengage if they hew from too far away, or they don't come near you. And what I mean by that is like come below to the other side and stab in. So we start to get an idea of taking advantage of mistakes. So the opponent likes to take advantage of mistakes, and then if they do come near, be safe and parry, and then figure out what to do from there. When you attack your opponent, whether right-handed or left-handed, you can hew equally from either side. So don't worry about hewing from your strong side. Sometimes it's better to hew from your weak side. So here are the 11 categories that I came up with, and obviously I'll explain them better later. So 5 guards: parrying, soft and hard, awareness, disengage, invitation, pursuit, running in, attacking, fencing against low guards, and fencing against long point. Okay, are there any questions so far, by the way? All right, if anybody has any questions at any point, let me know. Or let me just, I lost the chat and I don't know how to find it again.
So if you
There should be an option at the bottom
just
to
if you
open
move
up
your mouse,
chat.
it'll show up chat at the bottom. But we're also we're keeping an eye on chat for you too.
Okay. Crap. Wait a minute. Chat. Oh, got it. Okay. All right. Onward.
How did you come up with these initially? Were you just like perceiving everything from the opposite stance of the gloss?
Which come up with which?
I don't know. Like
the categories?
Yeah, so I mean some of them obviously overlap.
Yeah, so the categories I came up with after making everything. I kind of looked through and looked for common threads and common themes throughout different things and what could go with what, and then I came up with the categories because I wanted to have something like the Hauptstücke. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so let's start with the 5 guards. So the reason I started with 5 guards are because in the glosses, we're first given, we have the 5 hews, and the latter 4 of them, not the Zornhau, but the other 4, all start with, they're all the Vierversetzen. So they start with breaking the guards. So basically what we have from the opposite perspective is fencing from the 4 guards, which is kind of a structure that a lot of other texts, including like the armored and the mounted texts, kind of take. They give you guards and then they tell you how to fight from each one. So if you look at the opposite of the Zettel, that's kind of what we get. So first we just, oh, and there are 5 because I include long point as a guard. So I just start off with just the descriptions of the guards, and these are all the same as in the regular gloss, so I won't go through and read them all, except I added long point. And anything in brackets like this I felt was kind of a reach that I was adding. There are some things in the regular text that are also reaches, but the bracketed stuff I thought I should, especially mention our reaches. So first is ox, which we get because Krumpau breaks it. So fence from ox. When you stand on ox, your opponent will try to attack the opening opposite from the side that your sword is held. So be ready to block it. So basically, if you're standing in left ox, you're blocking your upper left opening. So they're probably going to attack from the right. And that kind of leans towards my interpretation of how the crump to the hands should be done, because I think it should be pressuring towards that upper right opening on them and making them move towards it. And instead you step to the other side and hit them on the hands.
So Brent also wanted to know why you included long point as one of the guards.
Like in contrast to the regular gloss, which, just has the 4 guards.
Understood.
If that makes sense.
It does. And I remember I had a good reason for it, but I don't remember why it was.
Okay, fair enough.
If I think of it, I'll let you know.
Sure.
Oh, I remember. It's because you counter long point in the Shielhau with the Shielhau.
Oh, true. Okay.
So long point is brought up as a guard that your opponent uses.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so next we have the rest of the crooked hue. So now we see the opposite of the short hue. So if they try to bind on your blade, then, or as you're cutting in, then divert your attack and parry to the left. And same with when you're in ox. If they try to bind on hard, then kind of brace and push against it and prepare for a strong bind. And then if they disengage below, then parry it and work towards the next opening. So the Krump nicht Kurzhau, the short hue, is basically a response to them overcompensating for like it's a response to them expecting a hard bind and overcompensating. So here we tell you to overcompensate and prepare for a strong bind so you can get in a good situation. All right, so plow, stab them below. All right, so yeah, that's the only thing that it says that the plow does is stab the person below. So that's what we do. So poplar is Alber. I decided to just go with the popular translation for this because I can, and because it's also correct. So stand in the guard called poplar. If they approach with the sword over their head and threaten to, I guess, cut or stab to the face, then parry with the cross guard. If they rise further, then parry higher with the crown. And once you've done that, you can run in. So part of this reaching is kind of trying to figure out what their next move is once after they run in, because they never really say it in the gloss. They just say, like, if he runs in, do this. But why would he run in? What's his end goal? And my answer to that was either grapple or attack with the pommel. So from the day, vom Tag, hold the sword with up extended arms over your head and hew to your opponent's head. If they strike a lateral, oh, so this is long because they do lateral against, or they do Zwerhau against vom Tag a lot. So parry with the strong of your sword, and from the parry, you can give different, you know, you can bind hard or soft. So kind of the idea that I had with this, what this made me think of was you need to realize what your movements, or like how your movements are going to be perceived by your opponent. Because a lot of times when we're looking at the gloss, we say like, okay, you go into this bind, if he's hard, do this, if he's soft, do that. But it's never really addressed how the opponent is going to react to our pressure. So like we were talking about like the Mutiran, for example, before. So the opponent is soft, so we go strong to weak, and now we're kind of forcing their blade in a direction. So what about the person on the receiving end of this? Well, they're gonna most likely feel hard pressure when that happens. And when people feel hard pressure, they don't want to stay in the bind. They want to get out of it. So they're going to snap around, or go off the blade and cut around to the other side, most likely. So you have to kind of be prepared for that and understand that, like, the consequences of what you're going to do. So they can attack above or below, and then just parry all of them when he does high or low. If you've parried the high or low, the lateral hew, he'll attack to the other side, parry that too, and keep parrying as long as they keep throwing them from side to side. And that's a good idea, or like it works against the sphericopter. If they just throw a standard sphericopter with no changes to their movement, with no like duplirans or failures or anything, then you can just keep parrying them forever. When you approach, note if they want to feint with the lateral to one side and strike to the other. If they want to do this, sorry. Right, okay, so if they do a feint and hew to the other side, then parry that too, and continue to parry. So lots of parrying here. All right, long point. Hold the point long against your opponent's face or chest, and if they hold their sword to the right shoulder, they must hew to your blade in order to remove your threat. Therefore, be prepared to strengthen with the long edge against their hew or disengage around it. So this is kind of the response that the Shieldhau is trying to exploit. It's a logical conclusion that if you are holding your point to their face, they're going to want to hit it away or bind onto your sword. Another of the long point. If he threatens to hew to your head, rise and parry with the cross guard. So this kind of leans into a bit of my interpretation of the squint to the head and hit to the hands. So if you're threatening their head, then they'll probably rise up a little bit with their long point, either in ox or just in like a higher long point situation, so that the point's not in the face anymore, and then you'll hit their hands. But if they are attacking from above, or if they're doing a Shieldhau, then rising like that is a pretty good counter. So you can, if they're doing a Shieldhau, you can kind of bring your hands up and bring your crossguard up and take their blade and do an Absetzen. All right, next.
Question on that one, actually.
Yes, go ahead.
So rising into ox, so that sort of Absetzen motion,
Mm-hmm.
is from the normal gloss side of things, is the opponent ever described as doing that?
Sorry.
So if we're looking at the normal glosses, right?
Yes.
Are we ever presented a situation where the opponent does an Absetzen? I'm trying to think of one. I'm not bringing anything to mind, but
yeah. I mean, an Absetzen like it's described in the gloss, I would say no. It does say in the Krieg lesson, it says if your opponent does an Absetzen or sets your stab aside, but it's not really clear if they're talking about the Absetzen like were shown later in the gloss. So I would say it's never explicit, no.
Gotcha. Okay.
So there are no Absetzens in the anti-gloss. Unless you want to reach, which I sometimes do.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah. For this one, I'm just kind of trying to think of, you know, put yourself in that person's shoes. What are they going to do if their head is threatened? That opens their hands up. And an Absetzen-y kind of situation is kind of my answer to that, if that makes sense. Okay. So next is the gloss regarding parrying. So we've seen many parries already, and we'll see many more. So when you parry your opponent's attacks, then you can let your point go high or to the side so he doesn't reach you. And then from a high parry, so why would you parry like that? A, because it's secure. B, from a high parry, you can run in and attack with the pommel or grappling. From a wide parry, you may riposte with a hew, stab, slice, or continue to parry their follow-up attack. So the especially the Danzig gloss warns against parrying too high or too wide. But you know, if you are parrying high or wide and they're attacking from that angle and not doing a feint, then you're going to have a much more secure parry. You're less likely to get hit if they do that. Of course, we know that by doing this, we open ourselves up to, you know, plenty of other attacks, but it is a way that you can do things. For parries against hews, if your opponent attacks, okay. So if he attacks with an overhew to the left, parry to the left side, overhew to the right, parry to the right side, or to the side. If he attacks with an underhew, fall upon the sword with yours so he may not come up with it. And this comes from a few instances where they talk about if you were fencing from low guards. When you parry high with the cross guard so that your point and the key on both stand upward, this is called the crown. And that just comes from obviously the crown. So we are given kind of 4 different directions that the opponent might parry. We have like high parries, side, and then against low guards, they tend to like to fall upon your sword. Parries in the bind. Right, so those are parries against hews from the Zufechten. You can also parry when there already is a bind. So your opponent hews wrathfully. Oh, okay, so this is just the Krieg. They rise with the arms and stab to the upper left. Set their stab aside. So this is what I mentioned before with the Absetzen. If they set this aside by letting their point sink down low, then parry again. And then if they keep going to the next one, then just keep parrying. So you can defend yourself against all 4 openings. When you approach your opponent on guard and they hew from above from the right shoulder, parry the hew. If they then quickly strike around with the lateral and grip their sword in the middle of the blade and strike and attempt to plant the point in the face, then parry the point. So that's the Ringeck Absetzen there. Okay, soft and hard at the sword. This is the next of the Hauptstücke. Okay, know that when you bind at the sword, you may exert soft or hard pressure. If your opponent attempts to use your tactile response in order to decide their next move, you may exploit this by exerting the pressure that you want them to react to and take advantage of their reaction. So this is what I mentioned before. I guess I was jumping the gun. So understand the reaction that your opponent's going to have to your move. Don't think that you're always going to be able to control all the action. When you bind to the sword, make sure you defend your openings by parrying. After you parry, you may be softer hearted the sword. Hew earnestly from your right shoulder. Use equally strong to your head. Parry with strength. And do this on both sides. So that's the duplaren. Parry and remain soft to the sword. Rise with your hands over your head and ox and stab them to the face or chest. So that's going to be your Mutiran response. So basically the gist of all that is understand that your opponent's going to act in response to whatever feedback you're giving. Attacking to the sword. When you attack, you don't necessarily have to aim for the openings, but may aim for the sword in order to knock it away and create an opening. Or bind upon it soft or hard. Yeah, so the regular gloss kind of says that it's a bad thing to aim for their sword and not the openings of their body, except in the case of the Krumpau, I guess, but we don't talk about that. So therefore, the anti-gloss likes to attack to the sword, because if it's in your face, then you have to get it away. The opponent does that a couple times, I think, in the Sprechfenster section and in the changing through.
I like this approach, especially with the attacking the sword, because I feel like in the gloss it almost presents it as a mistake. Like, oh, look at this silly person attacking your sword versus you.
Right. Yeah, but then we attack the sword in the Krumpau.
Yeah. But I mean, that's on purpose, though. That's different.
Yeah, that's true. The Krumpau actually breaks every single rule, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
The Krumpau belongs in the anti-gloss.
Yeah.
Okay. What's that?
I just said, yeah, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
The crookedest of cuts.
Yeah. That's why it's called crooked, not because of the angle that it comes in, because it's crooked like a crook.
Yeah. Wait, does that mean you fight with no honor if you rely on a Krumpau?
It's possible.
Oh, no.
Why do you rely on a Krumpau?
I don't rely on it, but I really like it.
Well, I'll keep that in mind.
I'll just go back to my corner now. It's fine.
All right. Awareness. What was this all about? Hew towards your opponent down from above from the right side, towards the head or into a stab. If they hew in wrathfully, equally with you onto your sword, be vigilant and aware of if they want to stab in. If they do, parry their point to the side and do a riposte. So I found it interesting in the Zornhau, especially in the Danzig version, how the glossator kind of expects the opponent to react. So they expect them to be coming in with a cut, and then you do the Zornhau, and then it expects them to see the point coming in as soon as the bind happens and parry the sword. Personally, I find that unlikely to be happening, unless somebody's like backing up and you have more time. But if both people are coming in with a cut, I find it unlikely that in the time between the bind and the stab, the person's going to be able to parry. Usually, I think that would be like a redirection of the cut once you see that they're going to oppose you. But the glossator expects the opponent to act that way, so it's an anti-gloss. So figure out really fast that they're stabbing you and then parry it. When you approach your opponent on guard, you may not necessarily want to throw a committed attack, which you cannot divert once it's been thrown. Rather, when you're about to attack, notice if the opponent is ready with a counterattack, and divert your attack in order to parry their counter, which is what I just was talking about. personally, I think this is one of the few pieces of bad advice in the anti-gloss, because I think the advice to throw a committed attack and not regard what your opponent fences against you is probably the best advice in the gloss. Because if you come in not knowing if you're going to hesitate, not knowing if you're going to redirect your attack or go for an attack, then you're never going to end up going for an attack. You're just going to hesitate, and bad stuff's going to happen. Notice when you're about to hew in an overhew, if your opponent's ready with a counter hew. If they are, then divert your attack and bind strongly to their blade. If they wind into ox, be it the right or the left side, then parry their point high with the cross guard. So that would be against the winding from the Zornhau. When you approach your opponent on guard, if they lie with the sword in the guard of ox or plow, attack their opening with an over, underhew, or a stab. So this is from the Ansetzen. So the gloss would tell you to attack during the preparation of this attack, stab in. While you attack with your over or underhew, then be aware and notice if your opponent attempts to shoot in their point. If they do this, parry their blade and bind soft or hard. That's kind of good advice, I guess. If they, if you can see that they're going to try to attack into your preparation, then you should change your plan and, you know, do something different. If they have good timing, then you won't be able to. But
That's still technically you operating within the knock, right?
I would say so, yes. When you approach your opponent, you may attack with an underhew towards their lower openings. If they don't parry but stab above, then rise and bind to their sword and work to the openings, or strike around out of the parry. Right, so that's against Oberlaufen. So the main theme of the awareness section is times in the gloss where the glossator expects their opponent to change their intention and go from doing an attack to doing a defense, or something along those lines. Okay, and that is possible to do. Sometimes it's possible to do. In some situations. In some situations, it's not. Like when both people are moving in and the distance is closing immediately, then it's not really possible to change your intention, but sometimes it is. All right, this is a gloss regarding disengaging.
So that kind of thought process where you have to have this flexibility to change your plan sort of goes with what you had listed above, where like not having a hard set plan is okay.
Right, yeah. Okay, so disengaging, which is what I translate Durchwechseln as, so change through. When you approach on guard, hew and above. If they hew against your hew and don't extend with it, then feint and disengage below to the other side. Fencing short. Sorry, can you hold on for a second? I'll be right back.
Yeah, take your time.
No problem.
All right. Brent says, I feel like the disengage section in this anti-gloss isn't that different from textbook Durchwechseln and regular glosses. Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, I just thought that was interesting. I mean, like obviously the anti-gloss is different because it has a lot of, just keep parrying their attacks, which isn't really in line with the normal glosses. But, that disengage section to me kind of just seems like textbook Durchwechsel.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason that it is because, like, your opponent does that in the glosses. They do textbook Durchwechsels.
Yeah, so like it's not a uniquely Lichtenauer thing to do, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. So this is from, this text is the anti-squinter. So the squinter is supposed to counter someone who Durchwechsels by shooting the point. But if they don't do that, then freely change through.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have the anti-fencing short. So it's just all the fencing short things, except instead of them being bad, they're things that you're perfectly fine to do. Which the gloss doesn't really say they're bad either. So, so falling upon, not extending your arms, fencing from ox or plow, and winding at the sword. If they try to disengage, then parry. When you approach on guard, if they hew above strong, hew strongly to their sword and parry their attack. If they let the point, okay, so if they disengage before you can bind, and stab to the other side, parry the stab and continue to parry as long as they are disengaging. So that's just the opposite of our Durchwechseln. Yeah. So that's one of the main things that we're really taught to, or told to look out for in the gloss, is somebody who's trying to change through against us. All right, invitation. When you attack your opponent, your initial strike does not always have to be towards the openings of your opponent's body or their sword. Right, okay. So when you approach on guard, if they stand from the day, then throw a long hew out of distance and follow through with your point towards the ground. So you invite them to attack your upper opening. And then if they strike towards your invitation, then rise with the sword and bind below. And then if they remain, then raise upwards. If they jump with the left foot behind, yeah, and then just parry everything. So this is from Nachreisen, and it leans into another interpretation that's a little bit more wild than the others, and that is that the main play of the Nachreisen, which is they cut out of distance all the way to the ground, and then you cut in against them. I kind of interpret that as being an invitational cut that they're doing. So they're not necessarily making a mistake by cutting out of distance, but they're cutting in front of you down like to a low guard, trying to bait out a response, to which they will come up and do a little sweep against, or some like Fiore stuff against it. And that's something that's not really recommended by the glosses. We don't have that kind of. We do sometimes have preparatory cuts, but none that don't directly threaten an opening. Usually they end with the point towards the opponent's face. Yeah, so that's all for the invitation. Next one is pursuit, which is Nachreisen. When you've parried and bound to the opponent's sword, don't withdraw from the sword and don't allow your opponent to come to any technique. If they wrench up and hew to the other side of the blade, parry or pursue them, and do the same if they jerk the sword to themselves and stab to the other side. So this is from the Zuken against a clever opponent who won't let you withdraw from the sword. If your opponent holds the long point against your face, hew his blade away with an over or under hew so you may create an opening. If you fence somebody and they disengage with their point below while you remain with your point in front of their face, then pursue or plant to their opening. So remember, this is something that we're told in the Durchwechseln to be careful of. Don't Durchwechsel while they have their point online, or else they'll pursue you. All right, against the Zuken. When you bind strongly at the sword, Remain standing still at the bind of the sword and assess if your opponent wants to hew in front of you or withdraw themselves from the sword. If they do, pursue them with the opening. So again, the clever person who remains at the bind. If they hew in above strong from the right side to your head, move forward strongly with the parry. If you've bound the sword, assess if they want to withdraw. And yeah, that's pretty much the same as above. So the pursuit is given a few times as something that we do when a bind is already established and one person leaves the bind, but the other person still has their point online or they're ready to go, and they just, take advantage of that and shoot in. So the glossator seems to have expected somebody to be smart enough to be able to do that. Okay. This is the gloss of the running in. So this is the next hauptstück. When you're running against your opponent, rise with your arms and overpower them above with the strength. And then attack with the pommel or grapple. If they're clever and want to run through against you and perform a body wrestle when you run in with the arms high, so if they do a Durchlaufen, run through with the arms low to clear the point to the side and perform a slice or grapple. When you bind your opponent's sword, clear the blade upward with your crossguard and run in with outstretched arms and attack with the pommel or grappling. So this is pretty much all from the Durchlaufen section. So they're all responses to an opponent who's running in. But like I said before, why would an opponent run in? What would be the purpose of them doing that? So you have to ask yourself that question in order to get the Durchlaufen to work.
Well, in the glosses, doesn't he mention, well, the Durchlaufen to me at least seems more defensive in the gloss itself. It's like,
yep,
they're your wrestlings if someone decides to charge in at you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is weird. Like, I wish they would give a reason or an instance.
Right. Yeah, so that's why the anti-gloss has you rushing in at the opponent.
Oh, well, yes, that would make sense.
Yeah, and I'm sure we've all been there when fencing, both on the receiving and the giving end of rushing, especially as a beginner when you don't know what you're doing. You might end up just rushing in and trying to figure out what to do from there. But rushing in is definitely something that people will do.
It can work.
It can, yeah, it can.
Yeah, I mean,
Go
sorry, go ahead. Well, I was just going to say my guess here, and this is definitely a bit of a jump because I don't think it's supported by anything in the text, but there might be a distance thing at play here in terms of when you should, like, when the opponent does the quote unquote bad running in and when you're doing the Durchlaufen. Like, if they do it from too far away, then that gives you the opening, but if they do it closer in, you might not have time for that response.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a lot of grappling happens kind of not with somebody necessarily running in, but with the distance kind of slowly collapsing. Like, you go in and bind, and then someone does some sphericopters, and now suddenly you're at wrestling distance. So that's something that we experience, but I don't know if it's really addressed by the glosses very much. Okay, so the next one is about attacking. Attacking and aiming for the openings. Approach your opponent in a point forward guard and prepare to stab. If they stand in the guard of the plow on their right side, shoot the point to the opening of their left side. Or approach with and be prepared to hew. If they stand in the plow on their right side, hew to the upper left, to the opening of their upper left side. Do this on both sides. So this will be your Absetzen response. So the opponent in the gloss is basically an aimbot. Whatever opening you give, they hew to it or stab to it. So it's a logical way to fence, but it's also predictable, which, you know, is not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, always aim for the opening no matter what. That's what the anti-gloss guide does. When you approach your opponent on guard, if they hold their sword in ox on the right side, hew above to the opening of the left side. If they wind to left ox and attempt to stab, then parry it, and do this on both sides. And then do the same in plow. So this will be your anti-winding. So start an ox on one side. If they're an ox on right side, attack left side, etc. If crooked.
You yourself aren't seeking the wind here, you're just responding to it?
Correct. You're the attacker in this case. As the anti-gloss fencer, you're the one attacking the other person. They're an ox. You attack the opening. When your opponent binds to the sword with a crooked hew, they create an opening on their left side. Hew from the sword to this opening, or you can enter with an attack against their guard. So this is the anti-Edelkrieg play of the Krumpau, which is like you crump them and then they, I think it's kind of like a schnappen around to your opening. So you can do that. When someone has bound to your sword, you may immediately follow with your next planned movement. Know that planning a series of movements before the engagement is faster than determining the best movement through tactile response. When you bind to your opponent's sword to the left side, strike around. Okay, so let's unpack this first. So this is anti-indes, anti-Fulin and indes. So the master of the sword from the main glosses is somebody who can feel in the bind and know what the best next move is and do it every time. So therefore the anti-gloss fencer doesn't feel in the bind, doesn't care about picking the best move. They pick all their moves ahead of time and just throw them all out in a row. Which is not necessarily a bad thing to do. It can be bad if you do it all the time. It can be bad if you do it in the wrong circumstances, but the benefit of attacking like this is that it's a lot faster. You don't have to take like the half a beat to, you know, feel what your opponent's doing and then choose the right thing. You just go like bang, bang right away. And as long as they do the response that you expect, you'll get it. You know, obviously the downside is if they don't do what you expect, then you're probably going to get hit or you're going to like double or something. Okay, so when you bind to your opponent's sword to their left side, strike around quickly to the right side with the lateral or otherwise. So this is an example of that type of attack. So you throw out a Zwerhau or, you know, an Oberhau or whatever, and then no matter what happens, as soon as the swords touch, you're going to come around and cut to the other side. When your opponent binds strong to your sword with a hew or otherwise, let your sword snap off of theirs and strike to their head. So the same thing when they bind hard, do a schnappen. And these two moves are, I think they're still pretty high percentage moves in like our current tournament meta. So you can, I'll leave it as an exercise for the viewer to see what that says about our fencing. Okay, so the next one is fencing against somebody using a low guard or attacking from below. So against an Unterhau, when you approach your opponent on guard, note if they want to attack with an underhew. If they attack long with an underhew and shoot the point in, then parry the stab. If they jump onto your right side with the left foot and strike lateral to your right side, then parry that as well. So that's your failure situation from Lev. Of course, then they'll do a fake hue and cut you to the other side, but don't worry about that. Just parry their cut. When you approach your opponent on guard, if they want to attack with an underhue, if they approach with a preparatory underhues, bind to their sword before they can rise and bring the stab. If they then rise and hang the point to your face, then parry the stab high with the arms and run in. Or parry to the side and, do whatever you can from that parry. So this will be your inverter, your anti-inverter.
Question, actually.
Yes.
So kind of similar to what I had before, failures are described as things that people plan ahead of time and do, and
Yep.
people change through against us as the normal gloss fencer. But are you aware of any cases where we have the non-KDF fencer doing a feint?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, yeah.
I think they always fence honestly. They're
Okay.
like well, let me get through the rest of this. There's not much left, and then
Mhm.
then we'll talk about the attributes of the anti-gloss fencer.
Gotcha.
Okay, so against barrier guard, when your opponent stands in the barrier guard with the left leg forward, sword on the ground on the right, hue to their most open target with an overhue directly to it. Same if they're on the other side. So again, this is just aiming for the most open target. Against the guard poplar or alber. If your opponent fences out of the underhues or the sweeps or lies against you in the guard, which is called poplar, fall upon their sword sooner than they come up with it. If they remain below at your sword and raise upward, wind in the point at the sword to the face or chest. Or strike around from the sword to another opening. And recognize when your opponent opens themselves with the pursuit. So if they ever leave the bind and you still have your point online, then pursue them. So this is a pretty common occurrence in the gloss. When you fence from a low guard, the opponent's expected to come down and bind on top of your sword, and then you work from there. Okay, when your opponent fences out of the underhues or the sweeps or lies against you in the guard called poplar, fall upon their sword. If they raise upward, then press downwards and work towards an opening. Or when they fence from the underhues, fall on their sword near the cross guard so that the point goes to your left side and work towards an opening or run in. Probably run in at this point because you're going to be pretty close. So this would be your anti-schnappen and anti-abschneiden. So the gloss against somebody using long points. So this whole thing is the anti-Sprechfenster. When your opponent hews towards you, be it with an over or under hew, or allows the point to shoot long towards the face or chest, bind to the sword and do one of these things. Either withdraw from the sword, strike around to the other side with an overhew or lateral, or remain at the sword and work towards an opening. When your opponent approaches close and holds the long point with long arms towards your face or chest, either hew into their head, hew to their sword to move it out of the way, or clear their sword out of the way and run in with high arms or low arms, either way, probably to grapple. So this one I never really fully understood, either in the gloss or in the anti-gloss, because it doesn't seem
Stephen, are you still talking?
You still there, Steve?
I think your mic might have cut out or something.
Hello?
Okay, I can hear you now.
I accidentally hit the mute button on the microphone's physical mute button.
Oh, okay.
What was the last thing I said?
Hewing in above long to their head, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I never understood why that's an option, but I guess maybe it's something that people did. Who knows? So that's it. That's the last one. So does anybody have any observations on how the anti-gloss fencer, on what kind of a fencer this person is? Or any insights that this might give us as far as fencing goes?
Well, at first they started off being that defensive fencer that you hear about in the very beginning of the gloss itself, where it says to, consistently defend will ultimately end up in you being struck.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of changes to this chaos approach. Where they don't have a plan, but they're still going to go in, and there's no sense of knock or fooling, so they're just,
Well, they do have a plan. They plan their stuff ahead of time and don't use Fullen. They just do like a preset combination of attacks or something.
Right.
At least that's how I read
yeah. I'm just like picturing the choppy guys, the constantly up and down choppy fencer.
Yeah. Do you think there's any good advice in this?
I think there's some. But I also have, a similar thought with the Zettel. Like, I know we're supposed to treat that as the fencing Bible, but not every move is good for you, right? And sometimes you have to be that defensive fencer. So how does one do that while simultaneously changing from being the defensive to regaining the vor and being the attacker once again?
Yeah.
I think this provides that opposite in order to find those opportunities to regain.
True. The way that I view the fencer in this text, or somebody who I imagine fencing by this, is kind of like a computer player in Super Smash Brothers.
Uh-huh.
So you can set them to level 9 and they'll be pretty good, but you start to, they don't move like a person. They move like a computer. They're always making the most logical, like they're making like logical choices to a fault, kind of. So like if you threaten this, they'll always parry it. If you open this opening, they'll always hew to it. You can basically expect them to, like if you, and on the other side of that, if you leave the bind at the wrong time, they'll always pursue you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like a person that some things you're going to be able to get away with that you wouldn't be able to get away with a normal person. And some things you're just going to get punished into the ground for that a normal person would never really be able to punish you for. You know what I mean?
I really like that analogy.
So, Stephen, could I ask when I hear this, I think about the tennis player that likes to go for the unforced errors. In other words, they're just waiting for you to make a mistake before they wreck you. This is a common thing in many sports, and even boxing or any other sport where you have this plan where you're just going to not force an error, you're looking for the unforced error. And that's what a lot of this feels like. Because a lot of times, like if you're aggressive, you're trying to force an error, and this is the unforced error.
Right.
You're looking for that person to make that mistake and take advantage of that mistake, whatever it was.
Yeah.
So, yeah, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, especially with the changing through and the pursuing. I think that's definitely like taking advantage of your opponent's imperfections. Maybe to a degree that's more than even a normal person would be able to. But yeah, I agree with that.
But I totally have seen people do this. Like they just sit there and they just wait for you to do something. Then everything you do, they just sort of do this other thing back at you. And yeah, I agree that sometimes they're that computer player, and sometimes they're just really evil and crafty. You're just like, do a thing, damn it, come on! And like they won't. They refuse, and they just pick this one thing. They just do it, and you just constantly have to somehow get past that.
Yeah. Yeah. If they're consistent with it, though, then you can figure it out and exploit it.
So was a premise to a question. How do you get somebody to stop doing that? Is there a way to make them change their code? Frustrate them? Like what?
Well, you just you figure out their move and you beat it, and then they'll either stop doing it or they'll keep doing it and you keep beating them. And if you can't figure out like how to get around it, then that's your job. That's what you got to do.
So counter to the counter.
Yeah, or deny them the ability to do it in the first place, whatever their move is. Figure out what they need to make that move happen and don't do that thing. Do other things instead. So like to give a simple example, if somebody hangs out in a low guard and they're just going to wait for you to like come in with an attack, and then they're going to come up and strike it away and hit you in the head. It's very simple not to get hit by that, because all you have to do is not come in with an attack above. So you just deny them that, and now their move doesn't work anymore. They have to figure out something else to do. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I asked because, again, everything I contextualized by the last fight that sort of sticks in my head. And what really sticks in my head was Messer at the last long point, where I faced two opponents that just stood in this one same guard. I forget the one guy, he's like from VAF, and he mostly fights with Bastard Sword, and he just showed up and used Bastard Sword versus Messer. And he just kept everybody at a long point, and he just refused to engage in anything. And the other fellow just stayed in sort of like a low forward plow or eber properly. And no matter what I did, I would attack at it. He would bat it aside, then he would counter. But that low eber with like the right leg forward and left leg back, just sort of like in tight towards the belly, I thought it was a simple thing to get past it. I just could not seem to get past him. And no matter what I tried to do, he would not come out of it. And that was the premise of my question. You get these people that just stay in that one thing and they just will not come out of it. And sometimes you can't get around it.
Yeah. You need to make them move. If they're waiting for you, then you can't give them what they want. So yeah, you got to make them move, either with like pressure or fake attacks or whatever. Because if they're just sitting there waiting for you, and you attack, that's what they want you to do, and they're ready for it, and they're just going to parry and repost or whatever.
Psychologically, it is unnerving, though.
Yeah, I guess especially in like a high stress tournament situation, it would be.
Yeah, I mean, even in like play sparring, like I know we all take turns in our weird like moments of stillness, and it's like there's just this psych out moment where you don't want to do what you have to do, because it like that element of stillness is that element of unpredictability, right? Like there's no clue really, there's no real read, right, except for the guard, and that's it. Like you're looking for the tell and there is no tell.
Yeah. Yeah. But the thing with being still is you can't attack from stillness without like being really easy to read. Which is why you have to get the person to move, because you can't like collapse their distance for them.
Mm.
It's like you're giving in to like their laziness, you know? They're like,
Yeah.
I want to stay here. I don't want to like have to move at all.
Mm-hmm.
And if you move in, you're like, no, it's not cool. you can't give them that. You can't give them the satisfaction. Yeah, I mean, I fence a few people who are like, you know, some of the people I fence do that sometimes, just like stand in a guard without moving and wait. And I kind of just, I always keep moving when I'm fencing. I'm always like moving in and out and like, you know, trying to find something. And eventually, as you like, you know, you creep in, like come out, creep in a little bit closer, come out. And like I guess like you make them uncomfortable, I guess. You have to make them uncomfortable in their guard, and then they'll get out of it. And then you can attack.
Makes sense.
That's also consistent with, if we take the sort of anti-gloss fencer as somebody who's going to, well, okay, that's maybe a jump, but yeah, like just sort of sitting there in guard and waiting for the guy to do a thing and then doing your thing is a lot easier, right?
Yeah.
Just in terms of like psychologically, you don't have to get to commit as much. So it seems pretty consistent with what we've seen so far in this stuff. So
Yeah. I mean, remember, anti-gloss fencer does like to attack. He'll find that open, you know, whatever target's open, he'll attack to it with a basic attack, with an Oberhau or a Zwerhau or an Unterhau, or a stab.
Regardless of whether or not it's safe to do so.
Right, sure, yeah. He won't use any Shielhaus, though, or like Krumphaus or anything, which is fine.
Oh no, that kind of paints this person as not necessarily a common fencer, but an untrained fencer.
A Fiorist?
Hey.
Just one who's untrained, I guess. Like it almost sets them up. So I know we call this in practice, this is a good partner, right? The one that is just willing to feed you the attacks and the stimulus you need to execute the proper techniques.
Right.
But if this is real life, well, maybe not real life, but like an actual fencing scenario, and that's the feedback they're providing you, then it's like a gateway to stunt on them, sort of.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they do know how to do it Zwerhau. So that's something at least. They can
But is
do
it a
like.
real Spherica, or is it like that weird middle Hal thing?
Well, it's a real Zwerhau. So where that comes from is actually yeah, it's in all the glosses. In Danzig, you have the counters to the Zwerhau, in which your opponent does like its Zwerhau to the other side, and you go like to either go under them or slice them or whatever. And Lev has that also from in Nachreisen. They come up with like a low sweep and bind and then do its Zwerhau to the other side. So yeah, the anti-glosser knows how to do its Zwerhau. At the very least, it's Zwerhau that from one side to the other.
Okay.
Isn't there also in one of the regular glosses where the opponent does a Krumpau to you?
That's in Ringek, yes. He
Right,
has counters
that's the
to
one.
Krumpau, yeah. So I guess they can do Krumpaus too, yeah. So I guess the only one that they don't know how to do is a Shielhau. Unless you think a Scheitelhau is something special, in which case they don't know how to do that either. But the shield howl makes sense because it says it's a good strange hue that many masters of the sword know nothing to say. So it would make sense that the anti-gloss fencer doesn't know it.
Mm-hmm. The charging was interesting too.
Just a quick question. Are you ever actively thrusting at them in any of the plays to make them do a shield howl?
The shield howl is never in the gloss. It's actually never done against an actual thrust.
Okay.
It's only it's in the zettel. The zettel says, the squinter breaks whatever flow strikes or stabs. But the gloss never actually has it against, a true stab. So the answer is no, but by the strictest definition, the answer is no. But I would expect the person to possibly do a stab against a shield howl.
Thank you.
Sure. So, yeah, I think that's all I have as far as this anti-gloss goes.
It's an interesting. Have you applied this at all to how you change, like how you drill, how you practice?
I guess the application would be I try to make the so you have the attacker and the defender.
Mm-hmm.
You have like the person doing the technique and the person who's supposed to be providing the correct situation. I try to have that person like take a more active role and kind of understand why they're doing what they're doing, instead of just saying like, you do this, so that person can respond. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Has it helped people, you think?
I don't know. Maybe. It's been so long since I've had class. I don't know. Well, actually, no. That's actually a lie because I haven't had class since I've written the anti-gloss. So no, nothing.
New things to experiment and watch out for.
Yeah. But I do try to have, like, even before COVID, I tried to have like the defender be active.
Yeah. We were messing with that too.
You have to teach people according to the anti-gloss and have them go to tournaments and see how they do.
Actually, dude, so you have to go further than that. You need to train a group on nothing but the anti-gloss and don't let them see any other like type of fencing ever.
Yep.
And then train another group like solely like on the regular gloss and see how they like match up against each other.
This is a dastardly plan.
I'd put pretty good money on the anti-gloss group in that case, I think. Equal training time. It's an easier system.
Agreed.
It also trains aggression, which...
Yeah. I think it would... So I think it would go to the anti-gloss at first. Like when everybody's still beginners. But then as everybody gets more advanced, I think it would start leaning more towards the regular gloss people.
Yeah, agreed.
I feel like Norwood did this. I remember hearing that Norwood trained people in common fencing first and then trained some people in KDF, and he found that common fencing people always lost against KDF, but if you train KDF people and just let them fight against KDF people, they doubled a lot more. But common fencers didn't double.
Well, I think it would depend on how you trained each group. I guess, well, the anti-gloss has a lot more just like straight up parrying rather than trying to go for fancy counterattacks. So if somebody is a beginner and they're just trying to go for fancy counterattacks all the time instead of just doing, regular parrying, which I don't think regular parrying is against like the gloss. So I don't think that should really be frowned upon in the first place. But if somebody's a beginner and they're just like solely trying to do the fancy counterattacks, then I think they would probably end up doubling a decent amount versus somebody who is just going for straight parries. I'm trying to avoid saying single time counter and parry repost fencing. Because I think it's a false dichotomy, those two things.
So Joe, this would go really good with your format you've done, particularly with some of the newer fighters in the Gemeinfechten, where you've put the partition up and you've handed them different sections of the book and you said just learn these things, then you mix them back together. And even when you are very strict about it, even a fighter that's got experience can clean their mind out and only do this. And I think you'd be able to do it in that kind of same format where you would just separate two groups and really just make them do this one thing and then put them back together. These two separate petri dishes and then put them together and see what happens. I think you could do that even with the experienced fighters. Just you'd have to really push them to be strict about what they do and how they behave. I think it's totally possible, and I think that it definitely worth seeing in action.
Yeah, it's not a bad thought. Yeah, the sort of anti-gloss side of things would definitely be easy to distill like that because,
Right.
again, there's just not a lot to it. I think
Yeah.
we would either need some people who already know KDF and are just going to stick to that, or, well, no, I don't really think you're...
So give the anti-gloss to the really new people, and then everybody else just do what you're going to do. So, take some Gemeinfechten folks that have got nominal experience and drill this anti-gloss into them, and then see what happens against everybody else.
Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting.
Hmm.
But I think, even experienced fighters, like we've done the same thing. We just do what you said. You said, do only this. And we're like, okay, we're doing only that. And it worked out. So I think with some discipline, you can make it happen. I think.
Yeah, I'm thinking like more of a Monday crowd thing, just so, because if we split along experience, it's going to be skewed.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, interesting idea.
Let me know how that goes if you do it.
Yeah.
I feel like we'll have to film it so you can see it.
This would probably be a ways off, but I'm willing once we can actually do that.
Yeah. The other ones you've done that have been really successful and been really cool. Yeah, Stephen, you'd have to see one of these sessions where he does this. He brings in just a part of, I think like you usually use two different books. Like
two masters, yeah.
Two different masters.
What did you use last time, Jeff?
I mean, I can only think of one time I've done this, but it was
Wallerstein and somebody else.
Wittenweiler. Yeah, Wallerstein and Wittenweiler. Don't actually know how to pronounce that.
I'm sure you did it like 3 times, something like that, 3 times. I remember you like.
We did one class where we did like multiple iterations of the thing.
Yeah.
That might be it. But yeah, it's just so for context for the people who weren't there or don't know, like, yeah, you just split the class. You say, okay, here's a handful of plays from one source, and then you say any action that is sort of described as being done here, you have at your disposal. And so you sort of break it apart into the constituent pieces, kind of like what the anti-class is doing here. And they say, okay, this is your moveset, stick to it. I think I tried to do some sort of distillation of the like tactical mindset, but that's a bit of a reach. So
yeah, that would. The other thing too, just separating them so they could not even see each other, like a literal partition, so that there's no cheating, because people will do that. They'll look at the other crowd and they'll watch what's happening, and just having this complete mystery of what the other group is going to do really was very interesting to watch in action. It was pretty cool.
What is the not the parry or post defense, but what does the anti-gloss fencer expect to happen when they take that action? Like, are they expecting you to parry and then they can riposte, or is what do you think their expectation is?
Against which action do you mean? Against any action?
So I guess the barrier guard, since I'm late in this, and I'm sorry for if you've already gone over it, if they attack the opening from the barrier guard, if you're on your low right and they attack your upper left,
Yeah.
do they expect you to parry so they can do a different action?
I think that they expect to hit you. I think they expect to hit the person.
I think that's maybe an interesting, because I'm thinking maybe they're thinking like a KDF fencer, but without the KDF techniques. Like they're attacking you because they're expecting you to parry, and then they're expecting to have a follow-up attack. But since you're doing a single-time counter, they don't get to do that.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Well, as for the barrier guard, for that case in particular, it's a little bit tough to know what they expect because all there is to that play is they cut in and then you jump out of the way and hit their hands. So, but it's possible that there are cases, we do have, like we have the section on, I guess maybe you got here after we went over this, but awareness. So the section on awareness is all about redirecting your attack in order to parry something. So for example, we have in the Zornhau play, the opponent comes in for an Oberhau, and then you do a Zornhau, and then they see your Zornhau and they parry it. So they certainly are ready to either call off their attack or redirect their attack sometimes, or respond to what you're doing in order to defend themselves or create a bind, or even create a favorable bind situation. In some cases. Does that kind of is that kind of what you were talking about?
Yeah, because I definitely feel like one of my partner is into language, and she talks a lot about language being a game, and it's interesting because when I'm listening to what I've seen so far, which is not enough. The idea that they're playing a different game than you is an interesting idea to me. Like they're expecting to follow up. Maybe they're expecting to follow up. Maybe they're not expecting to directly hit you, but they're not expecting you to counter with a single time counter. And that's where the KDF kind of short circuits their action. But they do have a plan, I assume. They're not just trying to murder you with the first shot. Or that's where my brain is going, at least.
Well, I think that I wouldn't. I think murdering someone in the first shot is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. That's how I fence. I do that all the time. I'm almost always going for the hit on my first attack.
Okay. But you have a secondary plan if that doesn't work.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the anti-gloss fencer's secondary plan would be a immediate follow-up, an immediate eyes closed follow-up, pre-planned thing. So I would say they attack with the intent to hit to like whatever is open, and then if it's parried, they'll immediately probably cut around to the other side.
Yeah. That sounds right.
Yeah.
They don't want to bind. Anti-gloss fencer's not looking for a bind, maybe. Or less likely.
You're kind of breaking up.
sorry, the anti-gloss fencer is not looking for bind interior, that's looking for bind interior by taking.
Sorry, the the quality is getting a little bit worse. It's
It's fine.
yeah. I think
Essentially, the anti-gloss fencer isn't looking for a bind at all, right?
so I don't think he is. He might be sometimes. I personally don't think that like we're ever really supposed to look for a bind in any case. But yeah, I think a bind is something that happens, and we have to deal with it when it happens. But I don't know. I might just be rambling now and not answering any.
Well, I mean, it was like, I don't know. I'm kind of looking at this anti-gloss, and I'm like, God, this is how I fence when I'm having a bad day. You know, like where your brain's just not firing on all cylinders. And
Yeah.
it's like you find a bind, and you're like, oh yeah, I can wind now, but because I don't know, it's like this person's operating on 50% of the information they need to really truly fence, like the masters, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, going straight for a target and then cutting around as soon as they parry will probably get you, if you learn how to do it well, will probably get you a fair amount of tournament success in our current meta. So I can't really say that it's bad.
But is that what we want, though? I mean, because then that opens up a whole other can of worms where, you know, are we just fencing for the tournaments, or are we actually truly trying to revive and reclaim?
Well, if you can do it and you choose not to, then how do we know what we're really doing is actually good? I think somebody should do it.
Charles was talking about doing this, and I don't know if he actually did or not.
What was he talking about doing?
Just straight up, not he said he wanted to just immediately. He said he wanted to revert back to common fencing and tournament just to see how far it got him. I know he did it in practice for a minute. But
Does he do a lot of tournaments?
No.
Not really.
Yeah, I mean,
he's been to a couple, but like it's not like a regular thing, I guess.
I think last year was this big tour year, I think.
I think a lot of what people do in tournaments could potentially be described as common fencing already.
I'll agree with that.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say because like everybody has different interpretations. Everyone has a different idea of what it means to, you know, fence in a KDF style, quote unquote.
What would your ideal KDF fencing aesthetic look like?
Martin Fabian, pretty much. My only not fully thing that he does, I think, is that he fences right foot forward with long point. But that's not a really huge deal to me. But as far as everything else goes, you know, sharp attacks, you know, using a bunch of the techniques from the book and assessing in a bind, using the correct move. Yeah, I think that he's pretty much the closest to my opinion of what KDF is that we have right now. I think Dustin Reagan is a good. He's an okay representative for early KDF, and from what I understand about Meyer, he's a good representative of them. Norwood's a pretty good representative of KDF.
I don't think he's not in this chat. You don't have to say that if you don't want to.
No, I'm just, no.
I'm actually really excited that we got to yours before he did his common fencing one, because I'm curious how much of this overlaps, if anything.
Yeah. He uses other sources for his common fencing, right?
I've never heard it. Will, do you know?
He does, yeah.
Like the effect regeln?
Yeah, that's one of them.
I think that's one of them, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what the full corpus is, but he's got that in there, and I think some par and feint, some later period stuff like that.
Yeah, I again I use the term common fencing pretty sparingly usually, because I think that sometimes when people hear the term common fencing, they get like this idea in their head about like a universal fencing system that everybody was using, like who didn't, fence KDF or whatever. And I don't think that's like an accurate view of how fencing probably was. But there was, there surely were things that you could probably expect most people to know. And there are common, quote unquote, like techniques that you might expect to have to go up against, or you might expect somebody to already know when you start teaching them your fencing system. So in that case, in that way of looking at it, I guess you could use the term common fencing. I don't know how Jake uses it, or what his specific ideas are. You're gonna have him talk about it in a seminar?
Yeah, so I just got his write-up and stuff today, so I'm good to post the lecture, or the invitation at least. But September 1st is his day.
Sweet. It's Tuesday.
Yeah,
Next Tuesday.
I have to double check. I can't remember. I think he said 8 o'clock for his, but I have to like triple check that timing.
Sorry, I came in late, typical form. Quick question. This beautiful document you're scrolling past this, are we going to keep that when you're done, or is this something you're just showing us now? And
Yeah. The Google, there's a link to the Google Doc.
Oh, awesome, thank you.
I have it in the event invitation and as well as on the event page.
Oh, yeah. Awesome, thank you very much.
So as long as y'all get those emails, you should have it.
Awesome, thank you.
No problem. Yeah, it was just it wasn't really hugely planned. It was just something I kind of did one day. I was like, hey, it'd be cool if I wrote this, and I wrote it.
You did this all in one day?
Yeah. It only took a couple hours. It's like, I mean, it's not that in depth. Once you have the idea of what it's going to be, all you have to do is look at each technique and see what the opponent's doing and write it down. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't a gigantic undertaking, but it was a rewarding undertaking, I think.
It's definitely useful. I'm going to go back and reread it later for sure.
I very much like it because it feels like the opponent is programmed a little bit. Like, it almost seems like the opponent has fenced or trained and training defense for their entire life. So when you take a specific action, of course they're going to take the action against that action. Or if you pick a guard, they attack against that guard because they've basically been programmed from a young age to do that. So
Yeah.
that's what it's really like.
Yeah. Yeah, that kind of it gets back to my analogy of the Super Smash Brothers computer player. You know, it has all these cool moves, and if you set it to a high enough level, it'll be a killer, but it'll still be predictable because it uses all the most logical stuff all the time.
It's really good at pointing out your weaknesses too, I think.
Well, like if you read this and you say like, "Oh, I do that all the time," then,
Well, no. Well, I guess that in that sense, yes, but also if you're easily countered by, like if you are executing a gloss-based technique and you're countered, I guess, by the anti-gloss fencer, that indicates a weakness in your execution in some way, shape, or form. So.
yeah, that makes sense because they because the anti-gloss is a lot of it is exploiting mistakes as far as like pursuit goes.
Yep. Whereas the gloss, I think, is waiting to capitalize on that perfect feedback, or that, I shouldn't even say perfect, but that environment of feedback or setup that allows for this technique to be executed.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing that I was thinking about, which I wasn't thinking about when I made this, but have lately thought about. I don't know his last name, but Adrian he's like from the French Fiore school, and he was talking in the HEMA Discord about, or no, he wrote like an article about the techniques as solutions to problems, which I mentioned at the beginning of this. And I've been thinking about that a lot because if you think about fencing, just starting fencing. So two people go up against each other with swords in their hands. What are the main problems that need to be solved? The most obvious ones, when you distill everything down, it's the question of how do I hit the other person, and how do I not get hit? So any technique that you look at, it's a solution to a problem. So you look at what problem is being presented, and then you kind of can switch perspective to the opponent and kind of put yourself in their shoes and figure out why they're doing what they're doing to make that problem occur. And maybe it's something that that you're doing that makes them do that, and you can kind of go back and forth like in a top-down kind of way, and eventually you return to the question of like, how do I attack my opponent? It always like comes back to that initial question.
That's fair. And I think the more often you do that, the faster you are at running through that question tree, I guess. Because like, I've definitely run into scenarios where I'm doing that, but I feel like 3 minutes isn't enough time to get to the correct answer if it's a tournament sense. Whereas if I'm free fencing, I have all the time in the world, right? It's like until me or the other person taps and says, whoa, I need a drink.
Yeah.
But the more we do that, and the more we problem solve and preemptively problem solve based off of past interactions, definitely impacts how we fence. But I wonder if that almost makes us anti-gloss fencers, right? Because we're waiting to capitalize on those mistakes, right?
Yeah, well, you can look at it like that.
Not all of us are as patient as you, Marlene. I'm way too impetuous for that. That's why this stuff will wreck me.
There's also a distance element maybe it comes to mind for me is we've been exploring in our school that the KDF techniques are done at I guess in a Fiore center longer position. So when you're doing Zornhau with like, you're winning the bind with like 6 inches of your swords touching, as opposed to winning the bind at the middle. So you're still not killed the person. You're not in the range yet to kill them. You just made them react. So in a way, I guess you can take the first action while still being in somewhat of a safe distance and still make them react. Or that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's possible. Yeah. I think either way is possible. Distance, I mean, you can do different things at different distances, right? So if you're at a far distance where if you attack in with a passing step, you still won't reach the person even with the point, then, you know, obviously you can't attack them directly on the first movement. So you have to do some kind of preparation either on the blade or like some kind of feint or something. You have to come in with some kind of covering action, and then the second one, the second intention will be your true attack. And that's, you know, that's a fine way to fence sometimes. But I don't necessarily think it's how we always should fence. And I think there are some techniques in the glosses that demand a close distance, namely the Zwerchhau. You really can't do the Zwerchhau at all from a longer distance, unless you consider it purely as a follow-up to an initial preparation. But that's not really how it's laid out in the text. So, but yeah, I mean, distance, of course, is an important aspect of fencing.
Yeah, I was thinking more of the Zornhau plays, but yeah, that's correct. I wasn't thinking of Zornhau plays, but I was thinking the reinterpretation of Zornhau plays that we've been doing.
Yeah. Yeah, Zornhau does seem to need a wider distance, if only because, or like mostly because you're supposed to line up a stab. I know a lot of people interpret it as an immediate cut, but if you're going purely by the text, the attacking action is a stab, and in order to do that while also being extended, you need to be at a longer distance. I think Edelson and Winslow made a video about that, about how you have to start from a little bit further away, and the attack that this is really defending against is a cut into a stab rather than a cut straight at the head. Which is another actual, which is another thing, because that means we should probably be practicing cutting into a stab as an attack. And then that also brings up the question of why cut into a stab rather than thrust into a stab, and why cut into a stab rather than just cut straight at the head, and things like that, which I think are all legitimate questions and have maybe useful answers. But now I'm just rambling again. Sorry.
I mean, you're right. I mean, to play off what you said, what comes to mind for me is you cut into a stab because you want more leverage to set up the stab. You want some kinetic energy in your blade so they can't as easily parry you.
Right.
But that, yeah.
That's true. The other advantage of cutting into a stab is that your blade, they can't do any action on the blade until the very last second, until the blade arrives at the stabbing position. Do you know what I mean? So if you're thrusting in, then they can engage your blade and, like, you know, push it off to the side or whatever before it arrives. But if you're cutting into a stab, then they can't do any action on your blade until the point is already there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now I have new questions I need to mull over. That's why I did the staircase for this one, because I knew it was just going to be a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So I wonder, if instead of attacking the head, there's almost this like, but it says, right, that you should attack the head.
Yeah.
And then thrust in with the point. So maybe we're relying on the anti-gloss fencer to take that half a step back.
Are you talking about the common lesson about huneering what you want?
Oh, maybe. I don't know. I think I'm rambling at this point.
Oh.
I've got too many ideas swimming in my head.
Yeah. I mean, I think both of them are valid attacks. I think there's reasons to do either one, an attack to the head or a cut into a stab. So,
I mean, I think it plays on the line of the idea that the common fencer or the anti-gloss fencer is a defensive fencer. Like, it is defensive when they're not aggressive. They're very binary. So if you've struck at them, they're going to take a safety step back. Or if you struck at them, they're going to parry. They're going to be very binary. They're either defending or offending, but they're not going to do a combination of both. So yeah, what you said, Marlene, makes sense. They're going to step back. They've lost the bind and there's now a point in their face, or they've realized they're in trouble and they're going to bail. That makes sense.
yeah. But they'll also punish you for cutting too far out or screwing up on your cut.
Oh, okay. But not material.
Which is like a third, you know. But yeah, if you're really threatening them, that's another thing the anti-gloss fencer is really good at, is knowing exactly when you're threatening them and when you're not. And like, if you're not directly threatening them, they punish you hard. And if you are, then they'll always parry.
Okay, so now I have a new theory where, there's obviously some understanding between Vor and Nock, right? Like, they know when to punish, they know when not to, even though you do say later on that they just kind of go for it.
Sure.
Regardless. But what if this is just, I don't know, and I feel like our brains do this periodically anyways, where like we think of timing and very long outstretched things. But if we shorten this to like quicker exchanges, faster exchanges, this is just the to and fro, you know? This is like the give and take of the fencing conversation, quote unquote. And when the Vor is regained, they're able to execute their techniques and quote unquote punish, as you said. I guess the only difference is if we treat this as like a true anti-gloss, their reactions and techniques of use are limited.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it.
Who's good at high-speed cameras? Anybody?
For what?
Well, my thinking is, it doesn't necessarily have to even be choreographed, right? I say we film an exchange, a series of exchanges for that matter, free fencing for, X amount of minutes, right? If you want to keep it 3 minutes like the normal turning time, if you want to go a little longer, then slow it down, I guess. We could probably even do this with YouTube. What am I talking about? Where you just slow it down, right? And then we go through the motions of labeling and identifying all of this stuff, right? So we can categorically identify each and every portion of their sword conversation, for lack of a better word. It's like a DOL.
Yeah. Understanding the flow of the exchange.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's something that is necessary to learn to be good at judging, or at the very least very helpful to learn. And I've kind of been working on it a little bit. Maybe not necessarily picking out every single decision point, but trying to identify like the flow of the exchange, who's doing what at what time, and how the outcome how the outcome came to be, rather than just the outcome itself.
I think that's important too, especially when people question, right? Because they're always like, wait, how?
Right.
Like being able to recall and verbalize back what happened is so useful.
Yeah. Yeah, you can do that. I mean, YouTube, you can slow down video. So any exchange you can look at and try to analyze exactly what everybody's doing at each moment.
Right? I know what I'm doing tomorrow after I finish. No, I'm finishing painting the laundry room tonight. I have like 7 cinder blocks left. I'm freaking finishing that tonight.
Yeah.
I'll do the YouTube stuff tomorrow.
So this could be like a different version of movie night. So we talked a little while ago about movie nights, or joked about it, but this would be a kind of thing where you queue up some YouTube videos and say, okay, we're going to talk about these. And then what we're going to talk about here, what we're only going to talk about here is where do we see, for example, the anti-gloss moments. Okay, queue some up, find some ones you think that express that. And then we go back and we get the popcorn and we only say right there, like there at that moment, that was the anti-gloss moment. Try to do that as a group.
Yeah.
It probably gives some good debates.
I like it.
I'm
And then we
down
all
for that.
realize that we're just a bunch of dirty common fencers.
I remember watching a TQ fight at Long Point, the last Long Point, where he approached with a left ox, pointed the sword directly at the opponent's face, and the opponent decided that, oh, I should just cut his arms off, like as the sword was coming at him. And I feel like that's something that an anti-gloss fencer wouldn't do.
Correct. Yeah. Anti-glosser would just parry if you're stabbing in.
Yeah.
Or if you're not stabbing in, they would attack your opening on the other side.
Or they would deal with the fact that there's a sword in their face or a point in their face, as opposed to just ignoring it and cutting the arms off, in theory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another question, I guess. Do we assume that the fencers in the gloss and the anti-gloss do not know each other? That these are 2 strangers coming up to meet and exchange a few blows, or are these people that they train and operate with?
I think that question is kind of outside the scope of the of the gloss. That would be I don't know. That's a complicated question. I think that gets to the question of what is the context of these Or are people going to be like doing sword fights with sharp swords where anything goes at all?
No, I don't know, because we know that's not necessarily the case. I'm just curious from like a training perspective, right? Like, this might not be what my style is per se, like,
Mhm.
but for the sake of this drill, I'm going to limit myself to these behaviors. Right? Like somebody going up to TQ or T Cool for that matter and trying to take his arms off, knowing that he's got like the fastest Spirit on the West, like, like that's stupid, right? Like,
Yeah.
an experienced fencer would know not to do something like that because of the Spirit coming around.
Yeah.
Or someone who has at least seen that person fence in any sort of capacity.
Yeah.
So.
I think that
like it worked perfectly when he did it. TQ threatened with a point. The guy backed up and cut off his arms. If the guy was thinking about, oh my God, I'm going to stab through the head, he could have just as easily got stabbed through the head. If TQ just twitched forward and stabbed him in the face, he would have gotten stabbed in the face. But instead, he chose at that point in time to take an offensive action against another offensive action.
Yeah, but remember, ox and plow shorten you.
Yep.
So if you're shortened, then you can beat that with a long action, and especially if he's stepping backwards at the time, I think that's a pretty standard response to someone in ox. If he's extending out with the ox and like actively running in and stabbing, then maybe that's a different story. But if he's just standing there, then that's I don't think I would fault somebody for attacking the hands or the forearms in that way.
Yeah, he was advancing, but not quickly. So yes, I can see where you're coming from.
Yeah, it all depends on the situation, really. But I could see it either way. Ox is hard to fence from. Not very many people do it.
It's not my favorite.
Yeah.
I
Same.
think it's like I don't have any source justification for this, but I really feel like it's just a transition point. Like, you do a thing, you hit ox, and then you move on.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot more effective like in the Krieg as a move than it is in the Two-Faced. But I gotta, it's in there, so I have to assume, unless proven otherwise, that it is a position that you can fence from in the Two-Faced, and it has merits. So
Yeah.
I'm not ready to throw it out just yet.
I'll use it as a trap against, if I suspect they don't know what they're doing, I'll use it as a trap. And I think it kind of gets back to the anti-gloss, doing this refused ox, just staying there and making you come into my ox.
Yeah.
You're springing a trap. But if you don't think of it as a trap, then yeah, they're going to get hit. But I like some traps from ox. They don't work against, high level people, but I can pull it off. If I think I can pull off a trap from ox, I'll do it. But yeah, I agree. It's at a higher level, it falls apart.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I found with ox, and this is, I talk a lot about the backwards winding, the Travis Mayer backwards winding, but I found with ox, if I do backwards winding actions from ox, I can fence much more easily from ox than I can if I try to do forwards winding actions. So like if I were in TQ's situation and I had the point on somebody and they swung at my forearms, it's really easy to backwards wind down and catch that strike. But it's not easy to do any other action to catch that strike, except for maybe back out or something. But if you're trying to catch the strike, you can backwards wind from a high left ox down to a low flug, but you can't wind any other way very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, my response to if my hands are up like that and someone's gonna, or if I know somebody's gonna try to do that forearm hit, I just lower my hands and get that parry into, I guess, kind of a flug, but with like a higher point. And then
Okay.
from there, it's easy to drop the point and stab in, or go for something else depending on the distance. And that's like, so a situation that comes up a lot is you do its Zwerhau and the person parries, and then it's not uncommon for somebody to parry its Zwerhau and then immediately go for that that same forearm hit that we're talking about. So sometimes I'll just go for its Zwerhau, and as soon as the bind happens, just drop my hands. So then if they go for that, then I'll have the block ready. If they don't go for that, then I still have, potential binding options. But yeah, and like, so if you're approaching an ox like that, on either side ox, I consider dropping the hands and like winding down to be like a natural movement from there. I kind of had the idea at first that if I'm starting in a high ox and I'm just dropping my hands anyway to do a winding, then what's the point of even starting an ox? But by starting an ox, you kind of create the situation in which dropping your hands and winding around is going to work. So it's not exactly 100% the same as approaching in flug from the first place. So just like how, like, if you approach in flug, then there's a good chance you're going to end up winding up into ox because they're, you might encounter a higher attack. So just a observation I had about approaching an ox, maybe.
And that brings it back to cutting to the thrust. Same idea, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
They'll do different actions if you're not point on versus point on. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. Fencing.
It's great. I miss it.
We know so much and yet so little.
Yeah. All right. I think I gotta head out.
Yeah,
pretty
exhausted the topic for the time being.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this, though.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks.
This was really great.
I'm glad everybody enjoyed it. I hope it maybe is helpful for some reason, maybe.
I'm sure it will. I need to go back and reread it. It's like I have scribbled notes and stuff from your talk today, but I want to go back and like pick it apart.
Thank you very much. It was awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Night, you guys.
Good night. Thanks everybody for coming.
Good night.